They didn't whisper it. They chanted it, a single word thrown over and over until it bounced off the gym rafters and came back harder, until it stopped sounding like a joke and became a drumbeat meant to make him smaller. You never forget the first time a room tries to take your body away with a word. A phone camera was up, angled for laughs. A teacher somewhere was shushing without looking, and he stood there, hands open, mouth dry, discovering that humiliation can feel like static. On your skin, every nerve alert, every muscle torn between freeze and flight. He saw the banana flash in the corner of his eye like a prop in a skit, and underneath it all, he heard the quieter sounds, a friend's breath catching, a kid's nervous giggle that sounded like shame, a basketball rolling off into a corner, as if the game had walked out without them. This is the story of what he did next, which is to say, the story of how you make a life in a place that tries to make you into content. It is not the story of a perfect victim or a cartoon villain, but of a boy who learned how to hold the heat without being consumed by it, how to turn pain into pedagogy, how to use a lens for witness instead of cruelty. It is a story about the law in the background and the daily choices in the foreground, about the difference between an apology and accountability, about how a hallway becomes a classroom when someone shows up with the skills to guide it. 1 year after the chant, under bigger lights, he stood on national television, not to retell the harm for ratings, but to teach the country how to unlearn what we were trained to laugh at. The chant didn't disappear. It lost its audience. He was a late bloomer in a family of early risers. His mother's mornings started with a kettle that whistled like it knew their names and gospel radio low enough not to wake the neighbors. His grandfather's hands smelled like motor oil and citrus soap. On Fridays, they came home with stories about engines that sounded like parables about patience. Their apartment walls were thin enough to let in the neighborhood, the violin practicing upstairs, the domino slap from 3B, the baby's bassline cry from 2A reminders that lives overlapped here, that privacy was something you made with care, rather than bought with square footage. On the block, the corner store owner knew which kids needed an extra granola bar and which families liked their milk in the glass bottles. The mural by the bus stop vowed dignity in colors that didn't fade. The alley 2 streets over taught a different curriculum after dark. School was an index of contradictions. He learned the world from teachers who read his name carefully on the first day, and from substitutes who chewed it into a nickname without asking. He learned math from a coach who insisted that precision was a kind of respect, and P from a teacher who graded posture like it was a personality trait. He learned which hallways made room for his voice and which shrank when he spoke, as if the air itself had been taught to guard certain boundaries. He was good with words, too good, some said, for someone who took up space so easily, so he learned to choose them like tools instead of weapons, to measure tone the way other kids measured layup arcs. Home trained him in a different craft, the keeping of receipts, which was both literal and spiritual. The paper kind rent stubs, emails, notices, the proof that promises had been made and requests ignored lived in a blue binder in the kitchen drawer, ready to be pulled like a record at a jukebox. The soul kind, who said what and when, who opened a door and who closed one gently in your face, lived in the body and came out at the right time, not as a list for revenge, but as the memory necessary to prevent gaslighting. On Sundays, the elder at church who taught breathing exercises called it keeping the ledger of your life. She would say, write down what happened, not so you can carry it forever, but so you aren't tricked into thinking it was something else. He became a student of rooms. He learned where adults listened and where they waited to talk, where a joke told itself at his expense, and where a look from the right teacher could flatten a bully without a word. He noticed the work of small heroes. A lunch lady who slid an extra orange across a tray, a custodian who found the perfect broom side eye to end a hallway skirmish, a librarian who made space at a table that looked full. He learned to spot the difference between curiosity and cruelty, questions that ask to know versus questions that ask to own, and he started answering accordingly. His mother taught him to practice range. Gentle doesn't mean small, she'd say while tying her headscarf at night. And anger doesn't mean dangerous. It's honest energy. What you do with it is the point. Online, the school expanded and dissolved. Friends and crushes and homework help. Also, comments that landed like pebbles thrown at a window at 2 A.M. He learned two truths simultaneously, that name-calling and rumor-spreading were nothing new, and that the internet gave them a bodybuilder's strength, 19 hours a day, 7 days a week. He watched classmates become caricatures and learned early, too early, that a kid can be turned into a meme in under a minute and live with the ghost of it for years. So he made a rule for himself that he wouldn't always keep, because teenagers are human. Nothing gets posted while you're hot. Count to 100. Recheck the caption. Ask yourself, will tomorrow's me thank me for this? Mostly, he was a boy who loved the sound of basketball, made when it kissed the backboard just right. Loved the feeling of a joke, landing with his best friend at the perfect time. Loved learning how to cook eggs without rubber edges. Loved how his grandfather's stories stretched time. He imagined his life as a straight path, somewhere to college, maybe, somewhere back home to give what he'd gotten. Then the chant turned the path into a question mark, and the question became his. Craft Dot, it was a pep rally that smelled like rubber soles and old popcorn. A winter afternoon when everyone needed a reason to yell. The band owned the corners. The cheer squad carved stunts out of thin air. And the seniors tried on superiority like a jacket that didn't quite fit. He stood with his teammates by the baseline, wrist taped and mind elsewhere thinking about a math quiz, his mother's text about stopping for bread, the way the gym lights were always a flicker too slow to warm. The first sound was laughter. The second was a single word his least favorite, a historic blade disguised as a banana peel tossed from somewhere in the mid-bleachers. He'd heard it hissed before. This was different. It rolled, gathered friends, found a rhythm, and became a chant. Not at first, he thought, don't give it oxygen. Then he thought, a camera is up. He saw a small red glow 4 rows in. He watched the assistant principal, head turned to greet someone, miss the shift a room makes when the air gets mean. He felt his chest tighten, that paradox of wanting to vanish while knowing you should stand tall. A friend touched his elbow, not a pull, just a promise of company, and he steadied. Someone near the top hissed a laugh, a guilty sound that told him a conscience had woken up too late. The banana came from a hand and landed by his sneaker. It would have been absurd if it weren't so precise. He looked at it like a bad prop in a skit, then at the camera that wanted to make it a punchline. He bent, picked it up gently, set it on the scorer's table like a piece of evidence, and turned back to the court. This wasn't bravery so much as muscle memory. When humiliation blows in, do something small that returns the room to its right shape. He didn't shout. He didn't preach. He didn't move to fight. He did the one thing that neither fed the room nor starved his dignity. He touched the ball. He passed it to a teammate. He played. By nightfall, the clip had a soundtrack. By morning, there was a remix. The account names changed. The captions didn't. And a few kids who'd said his name sweetly in biology posted laughing emojis that made him colder than the chant head. Adults did what adults often do when a room shows them who it is. Some looked away, which is a choice. Some said, kids will be kids, which is not a policy. Some told him to be the bigger person, which confused who needed to grow. A teacher he loved found him after second period, looked him in the eye, and said, I am so sorry. Someone else cautioned him, Don't give them the satisfaction of a reaction, which conflated silence with strategy. He did the practical work. He saved everything. He wrote down dates, times, and names without letting the list become a shrine. He reported the incident in writing, because oral promises dissolve and email has a spine. He asked for an investigation with a clock on it, because delay sometimes does the work of denial. He requested that any remedies land on those who harmed, not on him. No moving his seat, no new route to class that added minutes to every day, no suggestion that he should lay low until it blew over. The rule in his house was simple. Accountability does not relocate the target. The school began the formal process, slowly at first, like an engine in January. He was asked to retell the story more times than he wanted to, and he learned to choose when to say, "It's in my statement." He learned that "we're looking into it" can mean 10 different things, and that adults sometimes need students to remind them what prompt and impartial look like. He learned what retaliation looks like when it wears a grin, a bumped shoulder, a locker slammed, a whisper pitched to reach only him. He documented those, too, and let the folder get fat without, letting it define his day. Meanwhile, the hallways ran their own court. Friends debated what counted as too far. A classmate who had laughed in the bleachers found him in the library and mumbled an apology that sounded like a question. Someone slid a note into his backpack that said, "I didn't do it, but I didn't stop it. I'm sorry." He kept the note in the blue binder, not as absolution, but as proof that a room can learn to hear itself. His grandfather said, "We can fight to win, or we can work to heal. Sometimes we have to do both." His mother drew a triangle on a napkin: harm, accountability, repair. She said, "Pick the place you can stand today. Tomorrow you can move." He picked accountability first, because without it, the rest is theater, and then he started looking for a way to make the room different next time. He met with the counselor who had a habit of listening without writing. He talked to the assistant principal who admitted she had missed it and wanted to do better. He found a teacher who had been running a tiny lunchtime circle for kids who didn't like the cafeteria noise. He asked if they could widen it. He asked if they could invite some who had left. He asked if they could make the gym the scene of the crime into a classroom. He didn't set out to be a leader. He set out to breathe without bracing. The first circle was small. Him, his best friend. 2 kids he didn't know well, but trusted by instinct. And 1 kid who had posted a laughing emoji under the clip and then deleted it. A teacher facilitated, not as judge, not as therapist, but as a person who knows how to ask a question that opens a room. They agreed on rules that were not polite but sturdy. Speak from your own story. Don't perform someone else's pain. No fixing, no advice unless invited. The goal is not a hug. The goal is to tell the truth in a way that lets tomorrow be different. He spoke first because someone had to, and because he'd learned that being first doesn't mean being finished. He said how the chant took his body without touching it, how the banana wasn't a joke, but an inheritance he refused to accept, how the silence from some people he liked hurt, worse than the sound from people he didn't. The kid who had posted the emoji stared at the floor and said, "I thought it was just online. I didn't think you'd see it." He replied gently, "I saw it. But more than that, I saw all the people who liked it." What if we measured our courage in unlikes? No one laughed. The room learned a different measurement. He started a club he deliberately refused to call anti-bullying. Names matter. He named it Human, because the work wasn't about saying no to cruelty. It was about practicing the skills that make it unnecessary. They met after school, then before school, then at lunch when the cafeteria felt like a carnival with no safety rails. They learned to script interventions that didn't turn into fights, to ask better questions in tense moments, to use humor like a scalpel. instead of a hammer. They practiced the art of third ways, routes between telling a teacher and throwing a punch. They made pocket cards with simple lines. Come with me, I need you. Not funny. Say that again slower. What did you really mean? They designed posters that weren't scolding but sticky. We don't clown people here. Our jokes don't punch down. Your courage is more useful than your comment. He trained too. He asked a counselor for reading. He watched videos on conflict skills late at night. He learned how to breathe before speaking, how to name a behavior without indicting a soul, how to anchor an eye so the other person had less to push back against. He learned the differences between intention and impact and how to talk about both without letting either be the whole story. He didn't become a monk. He had days when he snapped. He apologized without bleeding out. People followed him not because he was flawless, but because he was consistent. He kept the receipts of his own mistakes and used them as material rather than as a cudgel against himself. The school shifted slowly. The administration stopped pretending posters were policy and trained staff on what to do when harassment names identity. The investigation process got real. Timelines, documentation, consequences tailored to behavior rather than to some imagined future where these boys will be fine. The gym teacher, who had always been better with balls than with words, started using a goofy hand signal that meant cut it out and a different one that meant go deeper, and somehow, miraculously, the kids liked it. The librarian put a book display together on the history of dehumanization and humor's role in it without making it a lecture. The custodian started quietly confiscating props. He broadened the lens beyond school. With two friends, he built a short video series in the AV room. 3-minute episodes with skits that turned common hallway scenes into choose what happens next moments. They showed the before, a shove, a laugh, and then offered 3 options: escalate, ignore, intervene. Each option played out. Who got hurt? Who felt powerful? What the room learned. They weren't corny. They were crisp. They premiered at lunch on a projector dragged into the cafeteria. Kids leaned in with trays on their laps. Teachers pretended to supervise and ended up watching too. The episodes traveled class to class on smartboards, then phone to phone. He said yes to speaking at a neighboring school when a counselor DM'd him. He said yes to a Sunday segment at his church, where elders nodded like prayers and teenagers nodded like relief. He said maybe to a local reporter who asked for an interview and set a boundary on what could be shown of the original clip. He learned to say no when a request wanted his pain without paying for his expertise. He learned to ask for stipends for the club's snacks because thinking is work, and teenagers work better with chips. He went back to the gym alone one afternoon when it was empty. He stood under the rafters where the sound had once felt bigger than him and listened to the quiet. He dribbled. He shot. He missed. He laughed and shot again. Later, during a home game, a handful of boys from the section where the chant had started sat quietly when an out-of-town kid tried to start something nasty. A teammate of his said, "We don't do that here," and the boy from out of town shrugged and changed his tune. Culture, it turns out, is contagious too. The invitation to national television came sideways, as these things do. A producer had seen the lunchroom episodes online, reached out to a local reporter, then to the school, then to his mother, because minors changed the paperwork. At first, he said no. He had seen TV flatten real life into segments with neat endings and inspirational music. He had no interest in becoming a case study. The producer persisted softly, respectfully, and said the show wanted to do something different. Bring their cameras to the gym, not to replay the chant, but to film what the school had built since. Not a gotcha, not a spectacle, a class on camera. He took it to the club. The vote was close. They said yes with conditions they wrote on a whiteboard like laws. No naming the kids who had harmed. No airing the original clip. The segment must include teachers and custodians, because culture is collective, and the show must make a donation to seed more student-led programs. They signed. They scheduled. They set chairs in a circle at center court under the lights, turned to face bleachers that were empty except for the crew. The host, famous, but trying not to be, arrived early, drank water, and asked to be told where to sit like a guest. He stood in the middle of the gym and took a breath. He looked up at the rafters and down at the scuffed floor and felt a clean kind of nervous, the kind that tells you the stakes are right. He started with the rules. Speak from your story. No performing anyone else's. We talk about behavior, not about souls. The point is not a viral apology. The point is to learn publicly so other rooms can too. He guided a conversation that didn't look like TV until you remembered the cameras. He asked a freshman what she does when a joke lands wrong and she wants to disappear. He asked a senior what courage looks like in a body at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday. A teacher told the truth about the day she missed a moment and how it felt to watch it pass. The gym teacher made the goofy hand signal, and when everyone laughed, explained why laughter can be oxygen or poison. The custodian talked about props and who cleans up after jokes. Then he did something the cameras weren't expecting. He invited 2 boys from the original section into the circle, not as villains, not as exhibits, but as students. They had agreed, but their faces still flickered between shame and defiance. He said their names gently and asked, "What were you trying to feel that day?" One said, "Big." The other said, "In." He nodded. "That's human," he said. "We all want to belong. But you can't build your belonging by exiling someone else from his body. Being funny is easy. Being generous is a skill." He didn't ask them to apologize on camera. He didn't coax tears. He asked them to practice a thing they could do again tomorrow. Name the moment it turned from teasing into harm. Describe what a friend could have done to interrupt them. Say what they will do next time to stop someone else. The boys tried. The gym listened. The cameras captured something rarely seen. Teenagers learning in public without being fed to Anne. Audience. The host asked him what he had learned. He didn't deliver a speech. He said, "I learned that my anger is honest and useful, but if I don't train it, it turns into a fire alarm that never turns off. I learned that jokes are architecture. They build rooms we all have to live in. I learned that the person with the camera decides whether a moment is a memory or a weapon." The host nodded like a man who had been waiting to hear a teenager sound older than a room allows. The segment ended not with applause, but with practice. They ran a short skit 1 from their lunchroom series live, with the host Ainley taking the role of the kid who says something that isn't funny. The audience at home would see not a rescue, but a rehearsal away to turn 3 bad seconds into a better next minute. When the director called cut, no one moved for a breath. Then the room exhaled, noisy and relieved. The episode aired on a Thursday. The text started before school on Friday. Old friends, a cousin in another state, a coach from a team they'd played who wrote, "I showed this to my boys. We're stealing your hand signals." The principals. Email inbox filled with requests from schools that wanted to learn how to make their gyms into classrooms. The show's donations seeded a small fund to help other student clubs launch human chapters. The custodian laughed and said he'd become national TV's favorite broom guy, and the kids made him a t-shirt that said exactly that. The ripple didn't fix everything. It did something both smaller and more profound. It changed expectations. Kids walked into rooms where adults had learned to hear small harms as early warnings rather than as noise. Teachers had a shared script instead of a collection of lonely instincts. The cafeteria episodes became assemblies by request, then Zoom workshops for other schools, then an online toolkit that lived in a neat folder with examples and scripts and tips for when a room goes sideways. He began to travel a little nearby. At first, then farther skipping games some nights to stand in other gyms and teach strangers the craft he'd learned the hard way. He stayed a student. He missed a shot, a test question, a curfew. He learned to choose between a TV hit and his health, between being everywhere and being here. He established office hours at a small folding table in the library for anyone who wanted to talk without being in a circle. He bought a small notebook and labeled it Fuel, where he wrote down the moments that kept him going. A ninth grader saying, "I told my cousin not funny, and it worked." A teacher confessing, "I said sorry in front of the class." For missing it, a parent admitting, "I laughed at something at the dinner table, and my kid called me in." The boys from the section where the chant had started became complicated humans again. One joined the club and learned to make fun of himself without making fun of anyone else's life. Another avoided him for months and then, slow as thaw, began to nod in hallways. No one became a best friend. That wasn't the point. Accountability had landed, repair had begun. Time would do the work that time does when people tend it. He started receiving letters from younger kids who had seen the episode with their parents. A fifth grader wrote, "I stopped a joke because of you." A seventh grader wrote, "Do you get tired?" He replied to that one with the truth. Yes, rest is part of the work. Ask for help. Make friends with people who can hold you when the room is heavy. He learned to say no to requests that wanted to strip his story of its complexity, and yes to the ones that came with the humility to sit in a circle and be changed. On the anniversary of the chant, the school hosted a basketball game. That was really a community class. The national host returned quietly, without cameras, and sat on the bleachers like any other guest. The lights warmed quickly this time. The cheer squad made a tunnel, and the band stole a halftime show with a drum line that made the floor hum. At the buzzer, they wheeled out a cart piled with bananas. For 1 second, the room held its breath, braced for the worst version of a joke. Then he walked to center court, picked one up, peeled it, and took a bite. "We can eat a fruit without making it a weapon," he said into the mic, grinning. The room laughed in relief, a clean laugh that didn't pull anyone. Chair out from under them. What do you do when a room tries to make you smaller with a word? You get bigger in the ways that matter. You expand your breath so your voice can carry. You collect receipts so your memory can't be bullied by someone else's comfort. You learn the craft of calling people in when that's possible and calling harm by its name when it's not. You make circles where there were only corners. You turn a gym into a class, a lens into a witness, a joke into a lesson about what humor owes to dignity. They called him a word that was designed, long ago, to take his humanity away. He didn't hand it over. He also didn't pretend it didn't. Hurt. He took the hurt to a table where it could be metabolized into skill. He trained his anger into a tool instead of letting it become a house fire. He learned that accountability without repair is a tally, and repair without accountability is a wish. He learned that culture is built in the smallest seconds on the breath you take before you post, the look you give before you laugh, the sentence you choose when a room needs leadership and doesn't know it. If you are watching this from a hallway that feels hostile, from a cafeteria that loves a spectacle, from a classroom where your name has been made into a toy, take this with you. Your feelings are not the enemy of facts. They are how facts live in a body. Write what happened. Tell someone who has earned the right to hear it. Practice your lines for tomorrow. If you are someone who has laughed from the bleachers, you can unlearn it. Decide your belonging isn't for sale at someone else's expense. If you are an adult in the room, be one. Train yourself. Make a plan. And when the moment comes, as it always does, choose to build a room where everyone can stand. That's not a television trick. That's a daily practice.